Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cactal YouTube channel today. This is the second video in our special series on digital equity in education. If you haven't seen our first episode where we explore why digital equity matters and how to achieve it, make sure to check it in our channel. And today, we are thrilled to continue the conversation with a very special guest. Kia is an engineer, educator, and entrepreneur who is deeply passionate about leveraging technology for impact. She also founded WebQT to address accessibility gaps in online learning and now works as a product manager at McGraw Hill, where she continues to drive innovation in education technology. So, yeah, in this episode, we will focus on practical strategies to bridge the digital divide and explore how we can create equitable learning opportunities for all students around the world. So let's get started. Kia, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with you today, for your time. And could you please tell us a bit about your journey? What inspired you to work at the intersection of technology and education?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for the opportunity to speak with you. And for my journey, so it started with just an interest in technology for me. As a younger kid, I was always interested in robots and like the ones you'd see in movies and just really cool technology. And I got pretty interested in that around like fifth grade time. And then I started to realize that technology could impact people, that we could use this technology to make real impactful change. At the time in fifth grade for the science fair, I had built a robot that was supposed to help find people after natural disasters. So having that real world example of how technology could be used got me really excited along that path. And so skipping forward through that, I went on to study computer science engineering in college and really fell in love with education. I loved working in programs, working with students. At the time, I was really struggling in my engineering classes and teaching kids the same concepts that I was learning and seeing them be excited and them see how cool it was. And that spark happen motivated me that I could get through my classes too. And so I went on after that to work in the intersection between educational and technology. So in ed tech. And then I actually graduated during the pandemic, height of 2020. So as we probably all experienced with a lot of transitions to online learning, everything went to online in a time that we weren't prepared for that. And so there were a lot of gaps. I was working at an educational nonprofit at the time. And there were students that were struggling to learn online. It wasn't meeting their needs, specifically for students with certain disabilities. And we had to address those problems. And I think that's where my startup was born from. But I'll stop there. That's just a background of how I got to this place.
Wow, that's really interesting and really great, experience that you got during this path. And could you please tell us more about your startup? You founded WebPT, as far as we know, to address accessibility gaps in online learning. So, what motivated you to start this initiative? Could you please tell us a bit background of this initiative and what specific problems did you notice in the system, and how did WebPT aims to solve them?
Yeah, so specifically, it was the height of 2020 again. So I noticed students that I worked with were struggling. Particularly, I'm working with students as well who had just visual dyslexia symptoms, minor visual impairments, just the strain that it put on them to have be visiting websites that weren't accessible. I think about 90% of websites on the internet are not accessible by the common accessibility standards that everyone should be following. And that really created a gap in experience for the students I was working with. And at the time, I solved it by just manually custom creating curriculum and materials and presentations for my students because they needed to learn. But leaning back on that engineering background and being kind of lazy, I was like, we could automate this. I don't have to go through this process for each student to make sure they have what they need. I can do it a lot faster and even more customized for each student. And so that's where the idea for WebClue was born, for how do we address these issues. And me and my team, and through customer discovery interviews, so many conversations came up with the solution of what we call digital glasses. It's a web extension that works across any website, customizing that user interface to a user's unique needs, from having text to speech anywhere that you need it, to dyslexic friendly text, to screen color contrast to reduce eye strain. We put this all into one extension so you're able to have an experience that meets your needs no matter where you are on the internet, because all websites are not created equal, unfortunately. And so we wanted to make sure that you have a consistent experience leveraging this. And so for how Digital Glasses works, you go through and you select your preferences. Think of like what you see at the top of like a Word document or Google document. So text, font, spacing, letter spacing as well. And you can customize all of those. So choose what works best for you. And so we call that sort of writing your prescription. And then you can use the extension Digital Glasses no matter where you are on the internet. And so really wanting to address the gaps for just the inequitable experience that students can have in online learning and meeting students with their very specific needs.
Wow, wow, that's really interesting. This is really important thing that you're doing. It's really impactful for all the people around the world, especially for the developing countries, as our organization support all youth around the world who's from developing countries. And I encourage all our viewers who are watching our interview today, please check WebKT website. We will share the link below on this video. So you have all opportunities for getting the skills, the knowledge that you really need for your growth, for your career and success. And thank you very much for doing such a great job with WebKT, with this startup, with this idea. And I have an interesting question to you related to your journey to the startup. What have been some of your biggest lessons learned while working on the digital equity initiatives?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest problems that I've had to solve or just challenges that I encountered was being able to understand the customer first. I think it can be really exciting to think about new technology and what's like new and cool and how can we use this to solve the solution, but it's really important to meet whoever you're trying to impact where they're at. So do the people that I want to work with have regular access to the internet? Are they familiar with using a web extension? There's a lot of questions to be asked to make sure that the solution that you're developing isn't just one that's like super cool, but actually meets the needs that they of the people that you plan to serve. And I think that happens through conversation. So being able to know what their pain points are, what their experience is, and not assuming that they do have certain struggles or experiences as well. And so learning to ask very open-ended questions that are just like, so what's your experience with this? Versus saying, so this is pretty terrible and it must cause all of these issues. Like, how do you feel about that? Because you're really implying what their answer should be in cases like that. So making sure that you're open to all feedback to really shape an answer to that question. And I think really importantly, just making sure that whatever solution you develop is one that can be integrated with how people are currently doing things. So you don't want a huge jump from one day you're doing everything on paper, the next day you're using like a VR headset to do everything you need to do. Like that's a huge gap in transition for that solution potentially. So making sure that you're incrementally being able to, if it's technology in this case, to iterate not integrate, but iterate on how you get to that digital space.
Yeah, that's a really important point that you mentioned because mostly all startuppers that started their journeys, some young enthusiasts that want to do some impact, some changes, some differences in this world, sometimes they are missing this thing, this lesson that I suppose every entrepreneur, everyone, every profession mentioned this importance of doing this task before launching and scaling something that they want to bring to the world. So thank you very much for mentioning that. And I propose to move on the conversation to the important parts today, the practical strategy for bridging the digital divide. So my first question will be to you. If a school or community wants to take immediate action to reduce the digital divide, what are the first three steps they should take? What advice can you give them?
I think it's really interesting. And I think that is the big question. Like, where do you start? Like, there's so many options
Yeah.
and tools, and what does getting from like point A to point B actually look like? And I think the first step in that is assessing what your needs are. So maybe at schools, that looks like surveys or just having those conversations, similarly to being an entrepreneur with like the teachers of that school, to make sure that you know what their concerns are. What do students need to really make sure you're defining the problem before trying to move towards a solution. And so, yeah, I think firstly, defining what the problem is, what are the pain points, what's working well, and how you can produce more of those positive experiences is a good first step. And then from there, I think it's important to assess like what do you already have at your disposal. I think sometimes it can be maybe assume that you should just jump to, I have this problem, let me buy this new thing to solve it. I think we all do that a lot of the time. But you probably, and schools probably have certain systems in place or technologies in place that maybe you aren't getting a lot of use out of. You could be getting more use out of the certain like devices if you have them, or leveraging certain community organizations that are around these schools. And so I think really taking a look at what you have currently and seeing how you might be able to leverage that better to meet students and teachers' needs is a really great second step after needing defining the problem. And then I think lastly, it's just the training. So if we want to use devices that we currently have in a better way, which is really vague, like what does that look like? How do you train teachers and students to make sure that they have an understanding of how to use this? And I think a lot of times, even when schools do have the privilege of getting like I don't know, let's say like an individual laptop for each student. Sometimes, or like a new like coding kit for each student. Sometimes they aren't able to use that immediately because like, what do you do? Maybe the boxes just sit in the corner for a while because it doesn't correlate with how you're currently doing things. So I think that training piece is really important to show the value in leveraging like whatever technology or however you're transitioning digitally, so everyone has that understanding and it actually can get used. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I suppose after today's interview, a lot of people, a lot of young leaders, teachers will have an action plan what to do for their schools, for their students, how to bring more difference in their communities. Because right now we're discussing about real action plan that they can do, real steps that will help them to bring differences. And also, a lot of communities, especially in the developing countries, are facing different challenges, and one of the big challenge for many schools is that limited funding for technology. So what are some low cost or high impact solution they can implement right away? Maybe you have some experience with this.
Yeah, I think when you think of like low cost, high impact solutions, back to being able to leverage certain resources that teachers may already have, something that I think is great, like assuming that a classroom at a minimum, if you're able to have one device, assuming it's a teacher's device, most likely, that you're able to maybe like project and share students like digitally what you're doing. There's a ton of interactive resources online that I think could be really valuable. So looking at sites like Khan Academy, different online learning platforms that are available and sharing that with your students through, even if it's just one device, being able to present that so students can do hands-on things while you digitally walk them through a journey or a project or whatever it is. So you're able to still have that digital experience while students are being hands-on. And so everyone's able to engage in that way without necessarily like everyone having their own iPad, for example, or something. So being able to still have that access, I think opens up a lot of educational like opportunities on that scale, but I think can have a high impact because the students are still able to go through that individual experience, especially nowadays with more customized learning opportunities for how you might engage with a certain project. So maybe you have a project and one student writes a poem about it, one student does like a visual project, or one student could like, I don't know, develop like a machine and put it together. I feel like there's so many options for how students can achieve certain assessment goals or measurable outcomes in those digital environments and online courses as well.
So if I will meet some of the teachers or some of the schools that wanna bring some differences, some new technologies into their schools, universities, etc., I will directly say them about you, about your expertise, and they can also consult with you, ask you for some advices, because with your experience, it's just awesome to discuss about everything, not only just with with discussion, but also seeing in the real examples how this works. And also, you have an experience as a product development manager, as far as I know. So, from this perspective of your experience, what are the biggest mistakes that education technology companies make when trying to create solutions for underserved communities?
Yeah, I think some of the big points are what we touched on earlier. So, like, one, assuming, making a lot of strong assumptions, like that there's consistent internet access, I think is a big one. I think even sometimes if you have internet access, like it's not always consistent, not fast enough to run some videos with products that I've worked on. Sometimes there isn't enough like bandwidth to run a video, even though it's online and you can access it. Like, can you actually play that video? And so
Mhm.
taking into account how students and teachers are actually going to be interacting with their technology is very helpful, I think, to really shape the space so you don't create something that isn't applicable or can't be used in their environment. Also looking at online and offline solutions, I think, is important out of that. So maybe you can't have consistent internet access. Is there some resource that you're able to get from online that you can use even if you're offline for a certain amount of time or doing hands-on things? Like, how can you integrate the two? So using the digital access as a resource in some ways. And off of that, I think in the edtech space, again, it's just really exciting with the new technology and AI and virtual reality and all of these things. But I think it's really important to look at where schools are at, especially with a lot of teaching being just paper-based, with worksheets and different lessons, and being able to acknowledge that, and that the solution isn't like transforming everything to digital and everything needs to be done digitally. I think not necessarily. I think it's really important to look at areas where it can help, but making sure that we're not hurting by disregarding what is working today, even if that is paper or not relying on technology as heavily. I think there is value in that as well. And how can we kind of have a hybrid approach of the two?
Yeah, that's a really important point that you're bringing up, and I also thinking about my experience, like a student's experience, once I was studying at school. As I'm from Ukraine, we have a bit different culture of studying, like it in Europe, but at the same time, with technology, we are struggling. The big challenge, it is all generation teachers who doesn't want to change anything, and they doesn't want to be replaced by young teachers that can bring something new, that can bring some new ideas, new technologies to the study process. So this is one of the big challenges that my country face. But right now, step by step, we are trying to solve it. And at the same time, I'm really glad that many schools around the world, they are going to digitalizing. They are starting to be more improved for students and bringing them more and more opportunities for study. And here I also want to discuss with you about curriculum. And what role does curriculum design play in ensuring digital inclusion? How can educators create content that is engaging and effective for students with varying levels of digital access?
Yeah, I really think that the concept of just how are we serving students with this different needs, whether that, like in my case, looks at different student disabilities, or in the case that you're speaking about, just different levels of digital access. I think that touches on just so many levels of that. Is really to look at the universal design for learning. It's a really great framework for how teachers are developing curriculum that can meet students' various needs, and it gives options. I think just the flexibility to be able to complete like a lesson, for example, with various levels of digital connectivity, and ideas for how you can, to what you were saying, get students more digitalized and what they could
Yeah.
possibly do to approach completing a lesson differently. And so I think as you look at that as sort of a tiered approach, and so maybe it's just referencing like a resource online for a certain assignment, or maybe it's more so like doing a simulation like walkthrough online, and being able to have students, I think, have choice is really important where you can, for how they would like to engage for their comfortability levels. and be able to still be able to reach that ideal outcome. So I think giving the options, the flexibility, knowing that it isn't all or nothing with the digital learning, you can start small and lead up to that full digital experience of comfortability. So yeah, I think it's really helpful for teachers to have that flexibility and then students to have that choice.
Thanks a lot. And what policies or initiatives have you seen that have made a tangible impact in closing the digital gap that's in some countries is really big? And what can the other governments or policymakers or business learn from them, do for them? So from your point of view, from your experience, how do you see it? What can you share with us?
Yeah, and I think in terms of the just policy in general and how countries are supporting education, specifically in the US, where I'm from, the pandemic, I think, really made it really apparent to me that prior to 2020, there was the school bus system, and you needed the school bus to get to school most times, and the government provided that to make sure students were getting to school. And now we were all online. And so I saw the internet as the new school bus system. If you can't get online, you can't get an education because you can't connect to everyone else that is in your school or your teachers. And so with the internet being that new school bus system and being a way that you can access just updates information and so many important resources, I think the policies around that is how do you expand internet access? So being able to expand broadband access in different areas, in more rural communities as well. To make sure that the internet access is an option. I think once you have that, you have abundant amount of resources to be able to use. So I think first and foremost is really like how do we expand that broadband access and seeing government support that and that expansion and companies that are providing access to internet around the world has been really inspiring to see. And then I also think community wise. So in your communities, there are certain like libraries that I've seen who support lending programs for devices. So being able to take a device home, return it, which is a lot more sustainable than having to afford to have your own. And so those lending programs from local community programs, particularly libraries, has been really inspiring to see, and just how communities can come together to support these needs as well.
Yeah, that's really important how communities can work together on supporting those things. And many students in the rural areas, in the developing countries, they not just lack internet access, sometimes they are also lacking digital literacy skills. So,
Yes.
what are some practical ways to teach these skills without relying on advanced technology? Maybe you have some advice that our young leaders, our viewers, they will be able to learn from you and implement it in practice.
Yeah, I think digital literacy is so important. And so that's like the next step in the equation. So like once we have internet access to a device you can use, like what do you do with it? Like what is
Yeah.
next to be able to access and navigate these resources and usually pretty quickly in school environments to get through like whatever assignment or lesson that a student's working on. And so back to sort of that hybrid approach, I think is really important. So being able to clearly connect like how you might have done something on print to digital. So when the teachers say like you could read this resource through like pages, I don't know, like 5 through 10, and then showing directly maybe through like a print resource and just clear instructions on what that looks like digitally, I think really starts to connect the dots of, oh, this is the same thing that I was doing before. It just looks like this now in this way. And I think that can make things a lot more clear. Just then sort of just jumping over to like we're reading everything online. So any like print instructions, connecting what you were doing before to how it simply looks now, I think makes that connection for students that, oh, same thing, different look. We can like move through this in this way. And similarly for teachers and training them up in that way to have the familiarity of how their needs are still being supported, no matter it being that digital environment. And I think it just comes through familiarity. So, and keeping up with it, I think is important. So that pattern recognition, just the familiarity of building a habit. And so the more that students can have consistent access to digital learning opportunities, I think that fuels digital literacy and becomes sort of second nature because you're doing it all of the time.
Yeah, you're right on that thing. And today's interview will be watching by a lot of young leaders, change makers around the world. So, how can young leaders and change makers who are passionate about digital equality set their own initiatives, even with limited resources, what they can do, some of the simple things for their communities, for their schools or universities? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think definitely connecting with your community. I think you'll be surprised how many people care about the same issues that you do, especially if you identify a problem. Like in my case, it was a pandemic and there was a ton of like connectivity issues. There's people that are impacted by these problems the same way that you are. So when you see that need, really find community. And I think once you find community of people who care about the issue, who want to support you in the change that you're making, that'll lead you to resources to develop that solution. So really value having those conversations like this really bothered me. Like, does this bother you too? Or have you ran into this problem? And how does it impact you? I think can give you a more clear picture for what that solution looks like and the resources that you need. And I think generally with entrepreneurship, also just acknowledging that it's a journey. So when you start, you usually won't have any resources to be provided to you. How do you like convey this idea? I think is the biggest question. And maybe that's simply like sketching your solution out on paper. Being able to break it down and explain it to people, I think, gets you into those conversations in different rooms for people that can help you bring that into fruition. Like for WebQuity, for example, today it's a web extension. You can find it online and everything. But when I first started, I like dragged like pictures into PowerPoint and just was like, so this is the idea kind of what I want to do. And even before that, it was just words. And I was able to get community and resources through communicating that. So when I started, it really wasn't anything special, but I had the idea. And I think that's what's most important. And then finding the resources to be able to bring that idea to life comes from the conversations and community connections that you'll develop. So definitely put yourself out there and know that there is a way to get to your solution, even if it isn't clear now. I think a lot of people give up on their ideas way too early before exploring how they might be able to even just take one step towards it. Because the big vision can be intimidating at first. So just the small steps that you'll take along the way and knowing that people will help you out to get further in that journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for bringing this to the table. And also, I want to remind everyone who watching us today that also networking and partnership are also important for bringing your ideas into reality. And from your experience, Kai, what are some of the most effective partnerships you've seen between the private sector, educators, and nonprofit organizations in addressing the digital divide?
Yeah, I think back to also what we were speaking of earlier, there's a ton of support from larger companies like Microsoft and Google who are helping like funding with local schools and providing device lending programs. And I think having such huge support from organizations that are that large speaks a lot and knows that this issue is important, that people are willing to help. And so I think most notably those stick out to me because I think they're really setting a great example of how other companies in the private sector should be supporting educational initiatives. And then as well in the nonprofit space, back to, we talked about just learning resources online. I love seeing like code.org and other websites that are helping students gain skills digitally through different ways of learning. So games and print resources even to learn to code, which I think can sound surprising for people. Like how can you learn to program if you don't have, if you're not like coding on your computer, but there are exercises that train you in the ways of thinking for engineering. And so there's so many options for access. So definitely those websites like code.org, like Girls Who Code, that are able to help provide resources to any student. It's the beauty of things being online and being able to access things digitally. So anyone can take advantage of those opportunities. So definitely love organizations like that.
Thank you very much. And last question that not last, but last about this big conversation that we have, I want to ask you about artificial intelligence and automation are that becoming more integrated into education. So how can we ensure this advancement benefit all students rather than widening existing gaps that we have?
Yeah, I think what you spoke about to digital literacy comes to mind. So making sure that students are aware of what this AI thing is. Like, what does it mean? What can it look like? From chatbots to automating certain like farming devices, even are using the AI and just all of the applications for it. I think the first step is to be familiar with what people are talking about. Because I think AI is a huge buzzword. You hear it everywhere. To have that understanding, even at a base level of what AI is, I think is the first starting point so that we are all on the same page. So when we see it in different spaces, you know how it might be impacting like your education or just other devices since it is everywhere, and only expanding. And then I think in terms of just gaps in general, it's really important that we make sure that on the development side of things that we're responsibly like creating artificial intelligence models. Like, are you able to ask a question and get an unbiased view of you that presents different sides of a situation so that you're able to make your own judgment versus being given one? Like, how do we do that with the information that we're training with? I think it's really important to make sure that we're inclusive with a lot of perspectives and making sure that, yeah, bias doesn't persist to widen gaps that we might already be experiencing. And I think personalization comes into that as well. So how are we able to make sure that the AI technology is able to serve, let's say like person A all the way across the world in like a country, small town, and like person B that lives in, I don't know, like Tokyo, Japan, in the middle of the city. Like, how do both of these people have access to this technology to help them in any way that they may want to interact with it? I think when we think about how people are accessing it, the questions they might be asking, I think there's a pressure, at least before the AI era, to make sure that you're asking the right question in the right way to get to the answer you might be searching for. And I think AI opens up the possibility to just ask the question. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect
Mhm.
grammar. You don't even have to know specifically like what you're looking for in particular, and it can help get you there. It can help you think through the question that you're asking, which I think is really huge opportunity. And I think that closes those gaps so that you don't have to have like certain vocabulary or certain grammar to make sure that you can get the answer you're looking for. It's very more human like. I was going to say, I wouldn't say exactly human like, but more human like, that you're able to have just a more accessible experience in that way, which I think is really great.
Yeah, that's really great. I'm really happy that we have artificial intelligence in 21st century, but a bit upset that during study at school and university, during this period of my life, we hadn't such opportunities working and learn even faster and quicker, thankful artificial intelligence. And yeah, we almost finalizing our today's interview, but still I have few questions to you. First one, what is one project or initiative you worked on that makes you most hopeful about the future of education?
That's a really good question. I had the opportunity to go to the Bahamas to do a hackathon with a company named STEMlingo. So at the time, I was a product manager for coding kits, and we got to go to the Bahamas and have students solve problems that were relevant to their local communities. And I think it was the best experience ever for me to be able to hear the problems that the students would want to address and being able to help them develop solutions. I think that's what's super inspiring about education, that we aren't just trying to get their answers right on a test or score really high to get admission to university. It's like, how do we solve problems that are specific to local communities, being able to use some of the same strategies, but personalize it to their experience. And so that was just super inspiring for me to see passionate, like young students solve issues specific to the Bahamas. I learned a lot about the Bahamas and issues they were facing, so also expanding my mind there. Yeah, I think that's what's beautiful to me, and it's being able to really serve local needs of the community versus just generally trying to, I don't know, learn certain standards. It's personal. And I think it's important for educational to be personal in that way.
It's really inspiring initiative, even for me. I just can't imagine how it was, and that's really a great opportunity to learn from that side. And also, what advice would you give to educators who feel overwhelmed trying to integrate technology into their classrooms? And what advice would you give to students who lack digital resources but want to stay competitive in the modern job market?
Yeah, I think for teachers specifically, just the sort of three-step plan that we touched on earlier is like, what are the needs? What can you leverage that you already have? And knowing that there's training out there. I feel like it's important, like when you're scoping out different educational technology tools, to make sure they have teacher support and resources, so that you're not going into the dark, that you can ask any question that you might have, that they're able to customize it in a way that meets you where you are with whatever your curriculum looks like at this point. Like, how can you use this tool to enhance what you're already doing versus starting anew without proper guidance. So really looking for that teacher support and resources, I think it's crucial, to integrating just more digital opportunities. So making sure that teachers are having their needs met as well, I think is very important. And looking at the benefits of where technology can help accelerate or make things easier. I think when we talk about personalization and just that customized learning pathways for each student, it can sound overwhelming. Like, how do I, like, if I have a class of 50 students, like, make sure that each student has their individual needs met so they can succeed? And I think technology can really help with that. So I say that as to hopefully encourage, like, continuing down that pathway to have different options of how students can engage with an assignment, or make sure that an activity is adapted in ways that students can engage in a way that makes sense for them. Technology really accelerates that. AI, as we were just talking about, that really accelerates how you get those options, because it is a ton of work on teachers who are already doing this superhuman work in their jobs. And so allowing technology to help you with the important work that you're doing. And then I think for students, when it might seem intimidating that you have this new technology and trying to keep up with the subject already, like I struggled with math a lot growing up. I feel like I can't imagine learning long division was a hard one for me in fourth grade. It was a lot for me to
Same for
figure
me.
out. Yes. And I can't imagine like trying to figure that out, like plus like do things on the computer and try to like, they can feel overwhelming. And I feel like it's important to acknowledge that that's okay. And similarly, that technology is there to help. I think that's the ideal situation, is that if you are able to do something like on a computer, digitally in any way, the goal is to be able to make that easier for you, not harder. And so encouraging students to ask the questions. Don't assume that you should be able to use like this like new technology flawlessly. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to have preferences that maybe you're not ready to transition that way yet. And maybe you still want to do some things on paper. So really communicating what you're ready for and knowing that there's help in getting you up to speed. I think especially with younger people, there's a pressure that we're like the technology generation, like we just get it, like you get a new phone, you don't read the directions to figure it out. But that's not true. It's okay to still ask those questions and be confused. There's technology that I use, and I'm like, the first time, if I can't get it right, I'm like frustrated. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And the being able to know that that's okay, and it's not a sign that you're doing anything wrong or that you aren't able to use it. It's just like learning anything else.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing it. And I have another interesting question to you. If you could ask governments, tech companies, and educators to take one immediate action to create more equitable learning opportunities, what would it be?
I think just generally, I think to what we talked about earlier, just like policy around internet, just the focus on making sure that students do have digital access, just the opportunity. Like if there's local devices in your community, if someone out there like works at a library or at a community program that could help a school have more access to devices, like thinking about that, what ways can we even, in the smallest ways, give students more access to these digital experiences on the government level for internet access, individual levels for teachers to just maybe if you have time to consult some of the online resources and learning opportunities that could really help facilitate your classroom environments and help you with that as on the teacher level. So I think just taking the opportunity to take a step back and look at what's out there and see what might be able to help your specific needs, and making sure that just that the opportunity is there. I think there's a lot of pressure to figure out, well, if we have this thing, like what do we do with it, and like how students are actually going to use it, or is it worth it? But I think you don't even get to that place if the opportunity isn't there. So I think just giving students the opportunity to try it out, experience it, and then make the judgments and evaluations past that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And also on our YouTube channel, we have a little tradition. In the end of each interview, we have specific question for every interviewer. So, what advice would you give to young leaders who want to make an impact in their communities, in their countries, maybe specifically in education and technology, but maybe not? So, what you advise them?
Yeah, I think to not overlook the problems that you face. So even if there's something very small in your day that like bothers you a bit and you're like, oh, I have to do this thing and like you move on, like that's an area for potential like innovation. That's a problem that you could solve. Like, and you probably are already solving these problems for the little annoyances in your life or things that you don't like or being able to do things quickly. Like how do you get ready faster in the morning? Or maybe you like to sleep in, but you still like want to get things done. I think all of us are innovators, and we're making improvements in our lives just because we have to a lot of times. And I think that is a potential for how you can impact your community too. And I really emphasize community because if you're annoyed by something or you have a problem that's really impacting you, you likely aren't alone. Like I'm 99% sure that someone else also feels that same struggle that you have. And so knowing that there are people that care about the things that you do and that your ideas matter because of that, and so really not to give up on your ideas. I think sometimes anyone can have a really big idea. We're like, that can never happen. Like, how do I like invent this new thing? I don't know. But I think just knowing that there's that need there and that you have that idea is enough. And I really encourage young people to trust that that is enough. And that to what we said earlier, there are resources and people that want to help you, and your network is so important. So to not give up on those ideas and that there are possible ways and ways that you might not even consider because you don't know yet. And so give yourself the chance to figure that out before giving up on those ideas. But you are all, I think, have the potential to pursue any idea that you have or address problems in your communities. And you're the best person fit to do that because of your experience. So just keeping that in mind.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kia, for today's interview, for your time, for sharing your expertise and inspiring ideas today. And also, I remind our viewers that you can follow Kia on her LinkedIn and learn more about her initiatives, about her work, because your work at the intersection of technology and education is truly making a difference. And thank you very much for being with us today. And to our audience, this was the second episode in our series on digital equity in education. So if you missed the first one, be sure to check it on our YouTube channel. If you found this discussion also valuable for you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this to our YouTube channel. And also remember, together we can work toward bringing the digital divide and ensuring every student has access to quality education. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, and keep making a difference. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you.